So hi there BookTube, I'm going to do a book review today for this book, Happy by Nicola Barker, by which I don't mean I didn't understand it or I didn't understand the techniques that she was using, which we'll talk about. It's just that having got to the end of the book, I didn't feel particularly enriched by the experience. I didn't feel dirted by it, which I have felt on the occasional book, but at the end of the whole experience, I was meh. Okay, so how do we unpick this? So I think let's go back to my relationship with Nicola Barker, who has always been put out there as an innovative, radical, experimental British author. And that was recently recognised because she won the Goldsmith Prize, which is entirely devoted to innovative writing. But the first two books of hers I read, which were Clear and Cauliflower, I didn't enjoy them. Clear was okay, but I didn't get on with Cauliflower at all, and in fact didn't finish it. And I couldn't see what was particularly innovative or radical about her. But when this got the official stamp of that through winning the Goldsmith Prize, I thought, well, I've got to go back and reinvestigate this. But in my Ali Smith recent review, I said at the end of it that this is the last chance saloon between me and Nicola Barker. Because if this book doesn't prove to my satisfaction that she is radical and innovative, then I can't see any point, persisting with her. So that's the sort of the background. And there's several elements of this book which utterly engage with what I'm interested in. So it's a dystopian future where mankind has almost brought itself to the point of annihilation, and in the post-dystopia world, in order to eliminate things like conflict, war, aggression, there's a race of what are called sort of pure humans, who are called the young. They're sort of perfectly formed. They have no sexual genitals, so they don't. There's none of the sort of conflicts arising about sex and gender. But what's interesting is that they're sort of hooked up to what's called the information stream, which is kind of like the internet, but as if sort of beamed into your head or whatever, from which all knowledge is derived, and therefore knowledge that doesn't exist on this information stream is effectively censored or prescribed. And there's what's called the graphs, which measure one's emotional reaction to things in life, in order to sort of knock out any sort of extreme emotion, which can lead to the desire, war, conflict, all of these sorts of things that they're looking to avoid. And stylistically, whenever one is having a thought or is saying something that has a sort of emotionally tinged word or potentially emotionally tinged word, the graph will pick this up and will colour the word in two scales of warning. One is pink, which is like sort of careful now. The other, which is purple, which is no, turn away from that word. Stop thinking around the concept of that word. And the words are coloured, either pink or purple. Although I have to say, with my eyesight, when I'm reading under electric light, it wasn't always easy to spot them because pink and purple were too similar to each other, and also the purple verges on the normal black text. In daylight, it was fine. I had no problem. But that's a petty quibble. I'm not holding Barker responsible for that. So this, there was a lot there to engage with me, because it's about prescription of language. It's about thinking about, well, what words are emotional in a very narrow scale of emotions, and therefore what words are not allowed on that scale. It was doing something sort of formatically and sort of typography with the colouring of the words. And I liked all that. That was fine. But basically the story of the book is that the main character, Mira A, seems to have some sort of flaw or kink where she is picking up things from the information stream which has not been fully purged of all the stuff that would be on the internet. But she's somehow sort of zeroing into this stuff, which is seemingly random, and it's making associations and leading to associations in her mind that sort of turn her into a rebel, and that starts to slowly undermine the whole system. And what I really liked about it is suggestive of the power of art as a force for revolution. Because Mira herself is a guitarist, and also someone who strings instrument, so she's also that sort of artisanal skill as well as the sort of creative artist. But also that the sort of the prescribed stream that she's hooked into is about a real life Paraguayan guitarist called Agustin Barrios, and it's the sort of insertion of his life and the stuff around him that begins to unravel all the threads of this information stream and the graph. And you know, I like the idea that art is revolutionary. So again, you know, lots to engage me with what I like. So the first third, no, not the first third, the first quarter of the book, it's building up nicely. I think, yeah, you know, I'm into this. The problems start there though, in that Mirror A realises that, you know, there's a problem here, and you know, she sort of, every time the strangeness happens, she sort of repeats these mantras, a bit like sort of, you know, what the old communist regimes in the Khmer Rouge would blare out over loudspeakers. And that's very repetitive and very tedious, even though, again, she does something slightly subversive, because happy, as in the title, is one of the sort of the mantras that you'd have. And it's got brackets around the A, because it's kinked. The concept of happy, the mantra of happy is not functioning properly. That even on her information screen, this is how it's printed out, whereas it should all just be in, you know, one colour and, you know, no brackets or anything. But so she's throwing these mantras at herself, you know, to sort of steer her back onto the straight and narrow, as it were. And there's an awful lot of that in the book, and it gets very tedious because they're the same things over and over again, because they're mantras. So to give you an example of that, so this is quite late in the book when she's really struggling between the two poles of staying pure and ideal and unconflicted with desire and passion and art and rebellion. This written account of Mirror A's activities has been downloaded directly from her information stream and then mechanically filtered. The written account of Mirror A's activities is available to everyone, because everyone can read each other's stream, so it's a sort of form of them checking up on each other. This written account of Mirror A's activities has been automatically edited to improve legibility and avoid unnecessary repetition. Well, I'm glad that report's edited for unnecessary repetition, but there's an awful lot in the rest of the book which is unnecessary repetition. And gradually, I cared less and less about this person's fight. She seems to be the pawn between this mysterious figure called Kite and a real perfect person called Tuesday. They seem to be playing out some sort of war or rebellion, you know, sort of revolution through the figure of Mirror A. But that's I don't think that's a sort of a central subplot, because it does focus through Mirror A's personal journey. And sort of as it wears on, she gets more and more about this Paraguayan guitarist and the sort of history and culture of Paraguay, how it, you know, sort of developed when the Spanish conquistadors, you know, wiped out or converted loads of the ethnic tribes to Catholicism. And what's strange in how that's done to me is that, again, one of the appealing elements is this considers narrative, this considers story. What is story for? Because all in the perfect world, these characters do not have stories. They're all part of a greater whole with one set of laws and one set of standards. And it's the insertion or the infection of story, and Mira started to develop her own narrative line, her own story, partly which has been sort of provoked by all this random stuff about this Paraguayan. So it is a consideration of narrative, the need for story. But the problem is, you know, a lot of this book is very fragmentary. You know, a lot of the stuff on the information stream is sort of fragments that she comes to, and that's fine. But then towards the middle and the later sections of the book, you get whole chunks of sort of Paraguayan history and you know, stuff about the tribes and stuff about this musician, and that's not fragmented at all. And that sort of, I think, doesn't work. You know, either it should stay fragmentary and she starts to sort of knit her own narrative through taking elements of this, which is what she's accused of by the information stream trying to pull her back. Or otherwise, all this Paraguayan stuff has too much weight and actually overloads the story. just tips it away from this sort of futurist, imagined, dystopia, and sort of roots it back in our earthly times, but a very sort of random thing about Paraguay. And as it said, Paraguay doesn't have much written history. Part of the reason for that is that it was an oral culture, and its art form is oral. And there's been this perpetual battle between the sort of the written laws that the conquistadors and the Catholic Church brought into play with, obviously with hymn books and, the Bible and all that stuff, versus the oral tradition, and how that what Barrios was doing was sort of, forging an art out of the two of them, because he played the works of people like Bach and all that, but on guitar in his own inimitable fashion. People sort of said, you can't do that, it's a sort of bastardised art form, and he proved them wrong, because he was such a virtuoso that he produced these brilliant renditions and won people over. So I'm not sure all that Paraguay stuff works. The book reminded me of Scarlett Thomas's The End of Mr. Y, which all happens in a world called the Troposphere, and also Anthony Burgess's Clockwork Orange, that whole thing about the rebel and the state sort of fighting to pull him back. But and those are two in my canon. Those are two really perfectly honourable books to I don't know if she's actively honouring them, but I'm happy that those two books came to my mind in this. That speaks well to this. But actually, what this book is it's a revisiting of Aristotle and Plato, because the sort of philosophy of the perfect world is that everything has to be in balance, no extreme behaviour, no extreme of thought. And that is Aristotle. Aristotle sort of said moderation in everything, so that you don't have the extremes of tyranny and despotism that was happening in certain ancient Greek polises. And Plato, of course, had the famous thing of the slaves in a cave, where there's a fire going and the slaves are all sat around it, they're chained, they can't go out the cave, they've never seen outside the cave. So they imagine that the shadows that their own forms are projecting on the wall, that is reality. Whereas, of course, reality is outside the cave, but they don't know that. They take the shadows as reality. And that's the world of the perfection here, that it is just sort of shadows. So the philosophy of that is, again, when they're trying to pull Mira back from the brink of her sort of revolution, perhaps you could make her understand how life is death in your world, how faith is war, how words are fluid, how freedom kills certainty, how narrative pervades every tiny chink and crack and orifice and poisons everything. So in the ideal world, they don't want you going outside the cave. They want you to continue on this sort of shadow sort of level of reality. And at one point, I just wondered whether these human beings were even real, or whether they were just some sort of computer program. Now, I don't think that is the case. But because, again, I felt that, it was very hard to get into Mira's, to have any empathy with Mira, really. And the odd thing is, I found myself, even though, I'm against, this notion of uniformity and censorship and no-go areas of human thought and creativity, I found myself, there were certain little sort of sections that the information stream would throw back at Mira, sort of saying, if you want to go over to the other side, this is what you risk, and, do you realise that the danger you're putting yourself in? And I sort of found myself agreeing with them, not because I believe in them myself, but in the context of this book, they seemed very sound and valid arguments. Not that I wanted Mira to stay in this sort of, crushing uniform world. It was a very odd reaction. I felt that the narrative put me into quite a perverse position, where I was sort of rooting for the totalitarian state, and I don't like that. I don't want to be sort of shuffled into that position, but that's what I thought about all of this. And as the book wears on, and her breakdown is sort of more and more as she's breaking away from the uniformity and more into finding her own way, and it had lost me by then, really. Not in terms of understanding, but just I didn't care. I really didn't care. I'd had a lot of repetition up to that point. And I had this stuff, and all the time she's fighting. No, I need to turn away. I need to keep think pure thoughts and all of this. And there was too much of that, so that by the time that she finally broke away and it got into sort of slightly surreal territory, and again, this is where I say it echoes Scarlett Thomas's The End of Mr. Y. I no longer cared about her personal revolution, and I should have. I really should have, but I did not. And so she emerges into the real world of pain and ambiguity and conflict and passion and desire and art and creativity. But it's a brittle world. It's a threatening world because you can very, very much go under and all of that. But by then, the journey that she'd undertaken to get there had so sort of heavy-handed and repetitive that, as I say, I didn't care by then. So, I think I would give it 3 stars because it is genuinely trying to do stuff. I'm going to show you some of the visuals, I think, because this is the sort of stuff not only do I like, but I do myself, although not quite with the resources thrown at this. So I don't know if you can see this, if I can find it again. So this blue here is some sort of backwards written text. There we have some literal, not speech bubbles so much, but as word bubbles. These glyphs, sort of embedded in sort of negative, what's that called, negative space or whatever, they sort of appeared earlier in the book, and this is the apotheosis of them towards the end, but they weren't really embedded. They were referred to once when they appeared, and then that time towards the end. I thought they weren't quite as sort of justified, really, in their use. What else have we got in here that I quite liked visually? So this is the cathedral, which was offered to Mira as a place to strive for, that sort of kicked off the whole sort of process of revolutionary thought in her. So that's why I'm giving it 3, because it is genuinely innovative and trying to do different things with text itself and calligraphy and typography and all of that. And to be fair to her, I don't think it was sort of gimmicky or a bolt-on. I think it was justified within the text as she'd written it as to why she was doing that. So that's why I give it 3 stars. But as an overall book, despite a lot of themes that I should have been really engaged with, I wasn't really engaged, except maybe the first quarter of the book, which in a way had the least sort of flourishes sort of visually. At times I thought this is like a young adult book, but clearly it's not, because the sort of construction of the text and what it was doing, sort of breaking up sentences and paragraphs and stuff, that is not a YA type of read. But the kind of level, the intellectual level of the characters. I mean, I know they were sort of quite simplistic anyway, because they came into this pure world where so much of the sort of depth, profundity and layers of human thought has been stripped away and not allowed. But it just read a bit simplistic to me. I don't actually know, books don't have to have a message, but this book didn't seem to have any message. So you've got a dystopian sort of self-censoring dictatorship of the proletariat. I mean, they're not proletariat, but it's like sort of self-governing dictatorship. And that's a bad thing, because it cuts off so much of life's richness. But that life's richness is very precarious and leads to sort of death and premature dying and sickness and illness and pain. And all that. Well, yeah, absolutely. But it's a pretty basic message. It's hardly profound. And there were times where I'm not sure about this. I need to think about this more. But there were times where, because Mira is using narrative and words to attack the sort of preformed block of words that you're allowed, there were times when words and narrative were a weapon, but they weren't metaphor. They were literally words stripping away other words by showing the possibility that these other words existed. But they were empty. They were like sort of words users, you know, if you're stoning, you know, throwing stones to break windows or whatever. And that's kind of an interesting thing, that the emptiness and the meaninglessness of words, other than their function to attack other words, like words as virus, words to predate on other words. And I don't know how deliberate that was, because at other times there are metaphors. So that cathedral I showed you was a metaphor for, you know, the sort of this other world, this sort of other spirituality, this other house, you know, from where she, you know, the world that she lived in, you know, something to aspire towards, and all that sort of. So there is metaphor in here as well. But it seemed to me that there was at various times words meant nothing, consciously so, and at other times it was highly metaphorical. And this whole thing about the Paraguayan, you know, guitarist and stuff, that was all engendering metaphor. So that's where I am with it. I think I have to say, given my original question, you know, is this Last Chance Saloon? Am I done with Nicola Barker? Well, to be fair to her and to give her a due, no, I'm not. I can honestly say the three of her books, I've not enjoyed any of them. But with this one at least, there were enough engaging ideas and literary techniques that I will watch her next output with interest to see whether I'm going to try and read it or not. Hopefully, if I do end up reading it, I might actually enjoy that one. But I really don't see what Nicola Barker is trying to achieve. I'm not accusing her of being gimmicky, don't get me wrong. She's absolutely using these techniques in an embedded way, but I don't see to what point, to what purpose. And as I said before, you know, novels do not have to have meaning. But most people like meaning. Most people like to come away from a novel saying, that book was about this. And I don't know what this book was about, except on a superficial level of a dystopian world that, you know, self-censoring and a character's trying to break free of that. Well, yeah, who wouldn't? That's not enough in and of itself. So I'm going to leave it there, and till next time.